Hey everybody, this is Jake with Book Duck, Code Duck. Basically a duck in anything that I do. I like ducks. But to get right into what we're doing, first of all, thank you so much for BookTube for getting in on this video. Thank you very much for Project Kyle, PK. You guys all know him. Thank you, my friend, for getting me into this. The majority of my career has been spent as a software engineer, network engineer, IT technician. However, I am a coder by day and a reader by day also. I don't do anything at night, actually, so anyway, but today we're going to talk about a subject that a lot of people who love books are deeply interested in, and that is what the movie wouldn't tell you about a novelization. So the book that we're going to focus today is this fella, The Curious Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, in order to research for this video, I have gone back through and I've read it, and I notice that I haven't been looking straight into the camera for the majority of this video. I'm sorry, I'm recording on an unfamiliar device today, only because I don't really have anything else to record on. Everything else is either full or whatnot. But what we're basically going to talk about is The Curious Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And this is backwards on the film. But anyway, what the movie wouldn't tell you. We're going to talk about 5 things that any film is ultimately not going to tell you about the book. First of all, it is the fact that Mr. Utterson is the person that we follow throughout the majority of this story. I know it's a curious case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but honestly, we are walking around behind the eyes of a friend of Henry Jekyll's named Mr. Utterson. He's a lawyer. He's the man who holds Jekyll's will and also is really disturbed by some freaky clauses that there are in his will related to a strange young enigmatic man named Edward Hyde, who's going to inherit everything that he has should he either die or, even more bizarre, disappear unexpectedly for 3 months or so. Basically, Mr. Utterson gets curious, and he wonders what is going on when a friend relates a strange story regarding this young Edward Hyde to him, and he goes on an investigation and uncovers a whole lot of the stuff that we know of today, or at least have heard of. Number 2, Mr. Hyde is not a big, hulkish figure. He's not like the Incredible Hulk. I know the Incredible Hulk is inspired by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but however, Mr. Hyde, Edward Hyde himself, is actually depicted as someone extremely short, almost dwarfish, very, very short. In fact, Henry Jekyll, or Harry Jekyll, as they call him familiarly, his friends, is actually the taller, broader, more well-built one. It's kind of like, to give another literary reference, in his Jekyll form, he's like Aragorn, and in his Hyde form, he's more like Gollum, like short, stocky, small, very young looking, which was ultimately Harry Jekyll's biggest thing. He wanted to see if he could separate his duality, and one of them was a young man. Number 3 is that Mr. Hyde, Edward Hyde, was not deformed. I know we've seen a lot of representations of him where he's got weird facial things going on, or he's got one arm bigger than the other. He actually wasn't deformed. He was, it's confusing though, because they say a lot of times that he gave off a vibe of someone who is deformed. He gave off a wrongness, and people just universally hated Mr. Hyde whenever they came in touch with him. But he wasn't deformed. A lot of people, when they mentioned, he seems deformed, they could never place their finger on why. They just said he gave off the air of deformity. Now, a lot of times that's just really relating to how wrong Hyde was. He was the product of something altogether more heretical. It was kind of like Robert Louis Stevenson, I think, was trying to make the point that it was kind of a blasphemy for Hyde to even exist. And the idea that we're going into here is that he wasn't deformed. He just looked like a young man that was just mean, really, really mean. So again, there's another thing, number 3, that we don't know. And the number 4, this one I found super, super interesting when I was doing research for this, is the fact that Jekyll and Hyde were the same person was actually a huge twist. It was a huge twist. It was like an I Am Your Father moment or an M. Night Shyamalan movie. It was something that everybody was wondering, who's this Hyde guy? Who's this Hyde guy? Who's this Hyde guy? Throughout the entire book, only to find out about midway through it, and the book's only about 100 pages all said and done. It's a novella more than a novel. that they were actually the same person. That Henry Jekyll was a doctor who was doing some really weird things that his colleagues didn't really approve of, even though he was loaded and really wealthy. He was just retreated into his laboratory, and then this Edward Hyde guy came about. It was actually a huge, huge twist. Nobody expected it. And if you read this particular copy of it, the Penguin Classics copy, they actually have a foreword that tells you that it was largely, media representation in books and movies, that people thought that this book was about what it isn't. So it's kind of interesting to read from the perspective of the people in the 1800s and in the late 19th century, that they were super shocked by this. So if you kind of look at it from that perspective and you go through the book as if you don't already know they're the same person, it's a really, really neat kind of play on the society back then. It's kind of an homage to what things were like, and it was kind of, there were three novels that kind of did this for the horror genre back then, and that was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and then of course Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the idea of the Jekyll and Hyde whodunit, the duality of humanity and how we all are good on the inside and evil on the inside, that's kind of started to be explored in this book, in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it was one of those things where the monster, unlike Bram Stoker's Dracula or unlike Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the monster wasn't an overt monster. It wasn't something that just hid away. Edward Hyde was seen in the streets. In fact, the creepy story that sets Utterson on this big crusade to find out who Hyde is that he just was walking down the street late at night and trampled a little girl and then just kept walking. He wasn't like Frankenstein's monster had to hide. He wasn't like Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, who just hid away in his fortress. He was an everyday man about town, and he just kind of walked around, and people universally hated him. But the whole idea behind Hyde for Henry Jekyll was that he wanted to have a form where he could kind of be debased, I think would be the right word. He wanted to be able to carry out all of his, all the things that were bad. He wanted to be able to do as Mr. Hyde, because Mr. Hyde was the evil half of him, I guess you could say. Which leads me to number 5. The fifth thing that you may not have known, and the book definitely would, or the movie definitely wouldn't tell you, is that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde explored an entire new realm of thought around good and evil. It kind of made doctors of the age look really, really deeply into, is the duality in people that significant? Or is this just, science fiction, essentially? Is this just a horror book? And what actually a lot of people have credited Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for bringing about diagnoses like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, a dissociative identity disorder. It actually caused doctors, as so many works of fiction do, to look deeply into how realistic is this? How real could this possibly be? Could somebody really be this double? Could their duality be that significant? Could they really be one person when they're at home this much and then another in public that much? Was their gap really that big? And if so, what causes that? And a lot of people actually do credit this work into spawning that school of thought of, are people really this divided on the inside between their good or their evil, or their one part of their personality or another? And I think all of us would be able to say that, yeah, we ultimately are. But in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, when Robert Louis Stevenson was writing, this kind of stuff really didn't exist. I mean, people ultimately thought that they were who they were, and everybody fakes it, but that was only because, that's just how it was in society. But it was a really neat and really influential work. And again, this right here, that is more than 100 pages, but honestly, the book doesn't start until here. This is the foreword of the book. This is the entirety of this story. This small little novella spawned the research that we know today into borderline and dissociative identities, and it's a really cool read. If you've seen League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or you've seen any of the film adaptations or TV adaptations of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's a really, really great read, and it's entertaining to see it more as like the Incredible Hulk, but he actually wasn't. It it was more not the separation between our hate and our love, but rather the separation between what is good in us and what is evil. There was nothing redeeming about Hyde. That was the big thing, is that even in a lot of film adaptations, they make him out to being able to be converted and come around and become good. And the main thing about it is that the purpose of Hyde was so that Jekyll could take all the fundamental evil that would be in any person and give it its own persona, its own body, its own personality, so that he could be absolved of guilt for carrying out the evil deeds that ultimately everyone thinks about every now and then. He wanted a means of escape. He wanted a means of plausible deniability. He basically wanted to create another person that he shared memories with, but no responsibility with. So if you've seen any adaptations of film, television, if you've seen any, I think there's a bunch of actually animes that are based around that. Jekyll and Hyde is such a fundamental part of Western culture now that it's kind of hard to find something that isn't minorly influenced by it, but it's not about what you think it's about. It really isn't. So I encourage you to give it a read, see for yourself how it goes, what it's about. In fact, we find out mostly about what is portrayed on television from the first person perspective. We find out about that through a letter and a will. But I won't spoil it for you, but basically Jekyll writes a letter to his friend Utterson and finds out about it. So we will leave it there. I'll let you guys go read it. Classic literature is amazing in the sense that it gets kind of a game of telephone as it gets adapted down and down and down until we don't know what it's about anymore. The next time we come back, we're going to do something with this fella right here, the Count of Monte Cristo. We're also going to adjust this one, and we're going to do something similar with the short works of fiction by Dickens as well. And this is just one of my favorite books of all time, Eye of the World, Robert Jordan. Great series, Wheel of Time. But we're going to do something fun with Alexander Dumas. We're also going to do something fun with Charles Dickens, because they are extremely wordy. Very wordy. We knew this. We're going to have some fun with those in the next video. But again, thank you so much to Project Kyle for getting me involved in BookTube. Thank you so much to BookTube. The hashtag BookTube newbies going up right now. I also am going to have a link in the description to some works that I've actually been writing under a pen name over on Wattpad. There is, I think the first 5 parts are up right now. I'm a huge fantasy junkie, so I'm writing a fantasy book over there. Please go check it out. Give it a star, give it a like, give it a thumbs up. Like this video and subscribe as well. And hit the notification bell if you want to receive notifications for future videos. We're going to have a lot of fun with books on here. And again, I'm a software engineer by trade, so we're also going to be starting a channel for code tutorials for those of you who like to both write prose, poetry, and software. We're going to get some of that involved here, but over on this channel right here, the Book Duck channel, the Code Duck channel, we're going to be focusing mainly on works of prose and poetry, and we'll get a little bit more into software on our other channel, which is going to be coming out in the next month or so. So again, give us a like, thumbs up, that'd be much appreciated. Hit that notification bell and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next episode.